How does one separate customs that predate Islam from the message of the Quran? Can history throw any light on the present? Little girls. We all know about male circumcision, but most of us know very little about it, if anything at all, when it comes to female circumcision. And this is perhaps South Africa's best kept secret.
I don't know anything about female circumcision.
No, I don't know that. I've heard some things about female circumcision whereby they say Allah is binary, but they also have male circumcision, female circumcisions going on in South Africa.
Hassan Islam gives an analysis of female circumcision in South Africa.
Female genital mutilation is an old practice that has been in Africa for a very long period of time, even here in South Africa, in areas of Mawlana, the Western Cape, and even migrant communities practice this brutal practice. Well, female genital mutilation involves the cutting of the female clitoris, and it's basically done. Those who do this
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this is a bit of a really sore point for me, having worked in parts of Africa like Malawi and Kenya, where it's still to this day is cultural norm. Let me say that it is not as though when we watch these videos we see female genital mutilation as a phenomenon that happens far away from where we are. This is not South African in its nature, but right here in Cape Town, there are still Muslim women who practice female genital mutilation and who still take their young daughters at 13 or 14 years old for the practice. And it's kept very hush hush because some of the myth around it is, of course, as you know, some people will say that it is Quranic, it is Islamic, and there is no evidence in Quran for it as far as we know. And so people don't talk about it very often, but it does happen, and I have had contact with some young women who have had the experience right here in Cape Town, and that's a little scary. But there are Muslims who believe that female circumcision is not allowed, it's haram, and there are those who believe that it is required. It is absolutely allowed and even recommended. So in truth, it would be incorrect to say that there's a clear position regarding female genital mutilation in Islam, and we don't want to call it circumcision because it isn't. Regardless of whether it is allowed or not allowed, simply on the grounds that there's not enough evidence supporting either position, unfortunately. Now, I suppose I could stand here and bring my own supporting evidence, but my opinion or my reading on the situation is not going to impact the ulama fraternity. It's not going to become a fatwa. But the most important thing to know is that Islam protects a woman's right to sexual enjoyment and health. And if female genital mutilation violates those rights, automatically the practice should be considered forbidden. However, the Western world is quick to assume that female genital mutilation is harmful to a woman without considering the different types and taking into account that any surgery carries with it the possibility of infection, and if not done in a sterile environment. And those who, and I'm going to state from the offset that I'm opposed, that I believe that it is haram. But those Muslims who believe it is permissible, please do consider that the conditions that it's performed under is often not sterile. Often those who are performing the procedure are not educated, are not physiologically clued up in any way, and this is causing further complication for young women. The World Health Organization separated female circumcision into 4 categories of genital mutilation, but they refer to it still as type 1 circumcision, and this is the removal of the clitoris, which is very similar to the prepuce of a penis, which is removed during male circumcision. And so this is the most basic procedure of female genital mutilation, and according to those who view it as permissible and recommended, the only halal way of doing it. But I can assure you from my work in Africa that it is not the way that is being practiced in tribal communities and endorsed by religious leaders in those communities. So the other procedures, types 2 and 3, the labia minora and majora and the clitoris may be extracted. So literally, you're taking off all of what makes a woman, physiologically I'm speaking. And these, by those scholars who say that it is permissible, they consider this forbidden. Now, it gets so complicated, I wish the whole procedure could just be forbidden, because it makes things a lot healthier and a lot more balanced. There's a slight confusion regarding what FGM is and what female circumcision is, but in essence, you can use the two terms interchangeably, but they carry different connotations. FGM is used when people often speak of mutilation when they want to be condemning circumcision, and female circumcision is used when talking about the medical procedure, and all of it is really not in the interest of women. And one of the concerns that I want to raise, and so this session is obviously prepared quite loosely because there was another panelist to talk about it, but one of the things I want to raise is, why are men talking about what women should be doing with their genitalia? Why are men? It's like my daughter and I once, she was much younger, and we were living abroad, and we went to the mosque, and the alim spoke of hijab and why women should cover, and you know how blessed it is and what a beautiful act it is. And I was having a conversation with her, I think she was 4 or 5 years old, and she's here today, and she said, "How would he know? He's never worn it before." And I thought, exactly, he hasn't worn it before. He will not be wearing it for many long hot hours in South Africa, where it can reach 34 degrees, and under the hijab it can get quite hot. So my concern here is that we have, as you saw in the video, ulama who are making very passionate pronunciations on the genitalia of women. You don't have one, you don't know what female genital mutilation feels like. So you should be consulting women scholars, and there are many of them, about what this is about and what it implies. So primarily, I would like to say we need to stop talking about female circumcision. There's no such thing. It's female genital mutilation. You're cutting away an important functional part. The foreskin is not functional when males are circumcised, but when women are genitally mutilated, you are cutting away functional parts of the genitalia, not allowing women to experience sexual pleasure, despite that it is a gift given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I want to say the reason this topic is so controversial also within Muslim circles is because there are hadith, albeit weak, that support circumcising or genital mutilation. And they are weak, which means they shouldn't be used to create an Islamic ruling. And the hadith are not collaborated by Quran. And so that makes it further problematic that we are insisting that there's this practice that happens that apparently leads to purity. The Quran does not condone female genital mutilation, and it certainly does not condone the compromisation of the health of women or childbearing. FGM is a practice with dire consequences for the lives and the functioning of women globally. Essentially, I am not an Islamic scholar. I want to place responsibility at the door of both Muslim men and women and scholars in looking at what FGM means and the implications there are for women, and most importantly, what this means for vulnerable girl children who are being violated and who are being cut without any choice. Our daughters' bodies do not belong to us, they belong to them. They will make the necessary choices, particularly because around the world, largely FGM happens at around 14 years old. At 14 years old, I think young women are fully able to decide what they want to do with their bodies and what they don't want to do with their bodies. But we don't own them. Our cultural community, our religious community does not own the body of a young girl. When FGM is performed, the clitoris is cut. Sometimes the vaginal passage is stitched, and the passage is no longer wide enough to birth babies, leading to enforced cesarean births. Now, the fact that women are unable to choose how they give birth is alarming, as it is her body, and she should be able to choose what she does with it and how she brings babies into this world. I want to argue that FGM is not instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or mentioned in Quran, but is a cultural practice serving no scientific, psychological, or physiological purpose. It has never been proven that women who are genetically mutilated are more chaste than women who are not. This practice has found its way into Islam, whilst not being what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires of us. And I want to ask today that we pray for all of those women afflicted around the world who are unable to choose for themselves because of practices that we do not oppose. Globally, we should have a loud, very loud, very, very loud voice, standing up for sisters who are suffering and who are being forced at as young as 14 years old. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah, shukran to Miran. I must say, Alhamdulillah, she did a wonderful job of doing that presentation, and we asked her like about an hour ago, just put something together. Alhamdulillah. Next up on our program is a short spoken word interlude that will be presented or read by an IPSA supporter and a dear friend, Maryam Bodhanya. She will be reading a poem written by the luminous and penetrating mind of Aisha Kaji. We were most privileged to host Ms. Kaji as a visa participant at last year's symposium, and this year we share in her wisdoms and mastery through her words. This poem is a harrowing and profoundly intimate narrative that captures the female being, her body, her experiences, her pain, her tenacity, in verbiest splendor. I invite you all to immerse in these words, and I call Maryam Bodhanya to the podium to read the poem. Assalamu alaikum. My body. My mothers told me it would be a citadel of pleasure. This body, my body, our body. Then they came, the warriors of Colton, turned it into terror's terrain. Here, only pain remains. They painted it in vivid hues, damson, crimson, blue. This body, my body, our body. Expropriated. They drill craters, leaving leaking sinkholes. The doctors call them fistula, though they used more than fists. Colton's warriors, mammons, devotees. Abandon the citadel that wasn't. Evacuate, gather remains. Refugee in rubble before fleeing. This body, my body, our body. Survival outside needs demarcated borders. No-go wastelands of non-belonging, dissociated, necessary cognitive dissonance. Dare not ask whether there is a right of return, ever. From beyond this arid landscape of hate comes a Messiah who quietly transforms fistula, unbreaking, recreating this body, my body, our body. Hope blooms beyond mere existence, tiny glimpse of regeneration, the alluring possibility of wholeness beckons, susurrating song of a return to self. Thank you. So I'd like to call Maryam Bodhanya and Zubaydah Ahmed to the front to receive a gift. There is actually one more gift I'd like to give out. I'm being quite generous today. And she doesn't even know that she's getting this gift, but she deserves it, alhamdulillah, because she's worked very, very hard and alhamdulillah been a very great support in ensuring that I got everything done on time. So I'd like to call upon Firial Mali to receive the gift, please. Female heads of our events, media, and public relations desk, and all of the beautiful artwork that you saw, that is all her work, mashallah. All of the certificates and the invites that I sent out to you, that was all females' work, mashallah. So, now I officially hand over to Nafisa Patel. Assalamu alaikum. I am most honored to be introducing this year's recipient of the Visa Award. For those of you that might not be too familiar with its background, this is an annual award that IPSA confers to exceptional women in our community as a way of recognizing and appreciating their contributions to our society, whether they may do so in very understated ways away from public gaze, or by boldly creating avenues and spaces for our collective human flourishing. This year's recipient joins in an illustrious company of past winners that includes the late Hafiza Fatima Gaya, who was awarded it posthumously to her daughters for being one of the very first female memorizers of the Holy Quran in the Cape, which is a noteworthy accomplishment in itself, but rendered especially so given the circumstances of her time. Other previous awardees include the larger-than-life media stalwart, the late Munaja Quran al-Marhuma, a trailblazing personality on and off our airwaves, and last year's awardee, Mrs. Suraya Sadi of the Body of Our Walking Ladies, who we are happy to have join us here today, for her bravery and triumph through so many personal setbacks that has motivated an inspiring movement, a community of movement and healing in the face of multiple social challenges. Each of these women helped demonstrate some of the very creative ways that women's labors contribute to, make an impact upon, and enrich our communities. So I'm especially pleased to introduce Sister Nuran Osman as the recipient of this year's Believer Honorary Award. Nuran is a community of faith and a regular contributor to IPSA's programs, including today's program. And I think after hearing her today, it is quite evident why she has been selected for this award. I will not need to give you a rundown of all her professional accomplishments or list her vast repertoire of community service. I will, however, invite you to view a short video clip as a mere glimpse into Nuran's incredible role and her contributions to our community.
The Irshaad Shelter for Abused Women. Representative of the South African community, we are diverse human beings rather than broken women. My role is to oversee our staff complement. I have an amazing team of 12 dedicated individuals who love to grow, educate, and inspire women. We house between 20 and 25 women and up to 40 children at a time. We spend 3 to 6 months rehabilitating each woman. However, if she requires an extended stay, she is welcome. Many of the women come by referral, so they can be referred by the hospital or the policing service in their communities. Some of them come because of word of mouth. People in their communities have told them that they are able to seek assistance from our shelter. I'm Nuran Osman. I'm the director at the Ihata Shelter for Abused Women. My advice to other women is do what you love with commitment and compassion, and you'll always be successful. It is my belief that if you need a hero, become one.
Mawlana certainly touched the hearts of so many people. As a gender justice activist, she leads, heals, and serves others with so much of untold compassion and integrity. However, there's one incident in particular that I would like to share, because I think it captures so perfectly the spirit of Naran and amplifies exactly why she is so deserving of this award. I recall listening to a young woman narrating her life story and speaking of her own journey of healing. She first met Naran as a substance abuser, a recovering drug addict, taking her first tentative steps towards resolving her own pain and hurt after suffering multiple forms of abuses and other systemic violences. As a convicted felon, just released from prison, she recalls this occasion whereby she was in a car with Nuran, and Nuran needed to draw some cash from an ATM. But since there was no parking, Nuran turned to her and without a second of hesitation took out her bank card, gave her a PIN code, and asked her to draw cash on her behalf. This selfless, trusting act was most certainly an intensely life-altering, deeply humanizing, and validating experience for this young lady, personally. But this action, I think, also encapsulates so perfectly just what makes someone like Duran such an exceptional human being. The capacity to reach out, to touch a heart, and to recognize another's humanity, to see and understand our collective weaknesses, our fragility as humans, and to not let the barriers of social expectations, personal interest, or even our fears cloud that reality, to genuinely and wholeheartedly embrace our collective humanity with compassion, the ability to unearth beauty in the face of so much of pain and horror, to live in the service of that reality, is a character trait that not only exemplifies the prophetic teachings, but it encompasses what we might refer to as a truly divine calling. Sister Nuran Osman, you have responded to that calling with so much of grace and fortitude. So it is with the deepest and most profound sense of humility, appreciation, and awe that I present to you on behalf of IPSA the 2017 WIWISA Honorary Award. Mubarak, may you continue to live your life, and may you and your loved ones always be treated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is indeed an honor to accept this award. I will say that I feel unworthy in the face of the gender-based violence statistic in South Africa, and that I can only rest and say I'm worthy of being awarded a Women's Award when all women are free of violence and pain and suffering, because we see this every day. Firstly, allow me to thank Almighty Allah for giving me the strength and courage each day, and sometimes even as they laugh at me at the office, to deal with very difficult clients and sometimes even gang members. I would also like to thank my parents who laid the foundation for a social development mindset and paradigm, as our home was often a haven for those needing help and support. But I think my earliest memory of social assistance, of helping others, is of my parents when, for their deep care for children in Nova Park in the 1980s, who had no other alternative but football. And my mom and dad made it their business to get those children to play football and keep them off the streets. And this is my earliest memory of sharing and reaching out. My children, all four of them, 3 girls, who remind me that we work not for ourselves, but for a brighter gender-balanced future, and for my son, who has a very gentle heart. And I hope that he continues to be gentle, particularly with the women in his life as he grows up. To my colleagues, Faisal and Shihama here today, who make the receiving of awards so easy, for the encouragement and support of my often off-the-wall, crazy ways of dealing with social ills and challenging gender-based violence. Doesn't matter what I come up with, they're up for it. To the women and children whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted me to care for, and who teach me that each day I must remember to love and care for the vulnerable and the oppressed unconditionally and without judgment. Jazakallah khair. I'm honored.
So we are quickly going to play a video of Nuran's work that she does at the Irshaad shelter and all of those kind of things. And then we have a bit of a surprise for her that we'd like her to watch. And all of you to join us in watching the show.
We are here at Irshaad shelter where Nuran Osman is the director.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Farah Matiba. I'm the Regional Programs Coordinator at Islamic Relief South Africa. I'd like to congratulate Sister Nuran Osman for her achievement in being presented with the NISA Award. It gives me great pleasure to see her being recognized for the great work she does for the marginalized and community, and her passion to support and inspire those around her at all times. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to inspire you and grant you the strength to continue in this journey, that it keeps all of the hearts of shelter dedicated to the support of women and children.
Nuran is a selfless human being, and she just exudes, empathy and compassion and warmth. And she's really someone who listens without judgment. Lots of love on your word.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are the parents of Nuran Osman, and we eternally grateful, first of all, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for granting us the opportunity to express our gratitude and our immense happiness and appreciation. All of those who have been involved in affording her the opportunity to receive the Honorary Award for Women in Islam, Women in South Africa 2017. When she was born, we had a different name in mind for her. But what happened was that her father was called away on business, and I decided unilaterally to give a name around. We like giving Alhamdulillah. She was able thus far to give light to those, institute those in need, and so on. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for her to carry on doing so. And of course, her father said to me, remind everyone that this is definitely a calling, and to continue to uplift those in need and be able to strive to greater heights, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Can we give another round of applause to the one small and large entrepreneur for Shana? Thank you very much for everything that you do for all those in everyone's lives that you touch, including us here. So, Alhamdulillah, we have reached the end of our program. And by way of cordially closing the day's proceedings, I call upon IPSA's principal, Sheikh Muhammad Ihsan Talib, to offer some of his insights and share some closing remarks to conclude and to close also with a closing dua, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Our distinguished panelists and presenters here at this annual symposium of ours, all of them included, including those who have already left, our honored visitors and guests here to our program, all of you who have set aside time to be with us here this afternoon, as well as our committee of the program here, the symposium, and everyone involved bringing the program together. I greet you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have been requested to put some comments together of what had transpired today. And it's difficult because it has been, I think, an emotional roller coaster for me personally. And I'm very honored I'm very humbled to have listened to all the presentations that have been made here, and I have tremendously benefited from them. I think maybe just to start with, is to say that I have tremendously enjoyed the depth that takes me back to the wildest experiences that I've had academically by Dr. Fatima Sidat. And so I think her prism of establishing al-ahliya as this legal capacity and competency as the basis for establishing the equality within the contractual sort of relations and capacities that women engage in is absolutely, really for me, very enlightening, in fact, groundbreaking for me personally. I think the essence that it relates to is something that we overlook as people involved in Islamic law, and that is the basic foundation that Islam as a deen is not just a deen of laws, but that it is preeminently a faith that postulates and that promotes values and ethics. And unfortunately, in the formulations of fatwa and in the formulation of Islamic law, we find that too often there is a discrepancy, there's sometimes just a schism between the law and the ethics of our faith. So this ahliya speaks to the very humanity, as Dr. Fatima had basically been establishing in her presentation. And this humanity is the essence of our divinely conferred distinctiveness as the human race. And that once we have left and lost humanity, we're no longer humans. And so I think for me, the ahliya aspect speaks to that a lot. The issues that you raised in terms of the details, obviously, I think, speaking about this relationship, I won't go into too much details of that, but it was something that, this whole notion which became relevant in the sexual relations between husbands and wives, and the less than humane relations or less than humane conditions that may arise in such relationships. The Prophet ﷺ was very, and in the Arabic language, one appreciated a lot, and Doc, you may have obviously encountered this. He encourages the husbands, and this would go both ways because the wives have to do the same in terms of the foreplay that needs to precede sexual relations. And he would say, Arsil Risala, send along a message before getting involved, getting into the act per se. Nonetheless, the references obviously to this mithaq, which the ahliya then extends to further, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty has also in the realm of souls confirmed for every human being, and that we are all participants to that covenant or to that accord with Allah Almighty. And so that equality, which stems really in essence from humanity, our basic humanity, guarantees for us this equality. But yet I am intrigued by your question of what did you say, Prof? What is a wife? Yes. So I would like to engage that a little bit more as the import and the impact of the question left me at the end enlightened, but also leaving some questions in my mind. But thank you very, very much for those very, very enlightening propositions. And I think, the reason why, unfortunately, we find within the tradition of ulama this schism between the law and ethics is I think we have also abandoned and we've actually sacrificed to our peril a very important, a critically important aspect of Islamic law, which we refer to as the fiqh al-waqi', understanding of contextual relevance. And so the Sharia in its entirety cannot be understood without an understanding of the context within which the Sharia applies. And so we've all but totally relegated that important aspect to irrelevance. And it is impossible for a person to be a issuer or a formulator of legal edicts or fatwa if that person doesn't understand the context within which he finds himself. Which brings me to our sister Maryam Bodhanya, perhaps first, is I want to thank you for also your references to case studies, because it's precisely through the case studies that we begin to understand the context in which we are operating. And so it is unfortunate that the kind of references that Sister Nuran makes is as really which lacks complete empathy. That a person who is being turned to for religious guidance can make the most inappropriate and inept statements at a time when somebody is at their most vulnerable. And that is again because we don't listen, we somehow don't care to listen or to find out about the context and the real situation on the ground. I found myself in my recent talks, referencing the same statistic, but for the whole year of reported rapes as opposed to the 9-month period, and using a figure such as 42,754 for the year 2016. And if we have such a crisis, if we have such a humanitarian crisis, then how can we become pedantic about what marital rape means? As an intuitive response, it should mean that we suspend every kind of consideration in favor of trying to understand how can this humanitarian crisis exist amongst us. So the whole idea of the contextualization is beautifully encapsulated in our sister's presentations, and it really tells the, I think, very forthright truth about how inadequately we are dealing as a community and a society with the suffering of women in these kinds of contexts. And we hope that what we are doing and what we're trying to do is to bring about consciousness and awareness towards ethical solutions and ethical responses and ethical leadership in everything, including this very, very sensitive area in our community. And so our sister Maryam, shukran, thank you very, very much for your presentation. And we at IPSA are all about balance. We like to bring in balance in everything. And so wasatiyya is what we are very motivated by, and it is the one thing that we also draw the most flack for. And so thank you very, very much for that. Our Sheikh, Mawlana Irshaad, has tried his level best to bring a humane construct, but he doesn't answer the cursing angel hadith. And so that challenge remains. And so that is one which also I don't think it helps us. I cannot help but hear the distinction that is made between the legal and the sunnah, as if the legal does not preeminently emanate from the sunnah. And so there's no distinction between the Quran and the sunnah for what is formulated as legal in Islam. And so there's a great scholar, and I checked with Sheikh Fakhruddin Uwaisi as you were seated there, who is a hadith authority, Yahya bin Ma'in. And so he was really well known and famous for his saying when he said that if you find any hadith text which is seemingly contradictory, then bring it to me, I'll give you its reconciliation. Now, the malaise and the unfortunate crisis that we are facing as a result of this fixation and this preoccupation with literal interpretations of text. Yahya bin Ma'in says no. Yahya bin Ma'in will say that when we interpret text, we understand, as Mr. Seedat had attempted to bring into our understanding, what the higher purposes are that are at play of the Sharia. And so never ever will we interpret a partial application text at the expense of the general application higher purposes of the law. And so you will reconcile them in that way, in every way possible. And so when we then look at how there's no way that the marriage contract can be interpreted to be consent for coercive, unconsented kind of sexual relations 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, 15 days down the line. The consent that is given there is as to be husband and wife and to be in the sacred context and sacred space of matrimony, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained as a sacred relationship between man and woman, husband and wife. And so all the socio economic, cultural, political rights and obligations are attendant to that act. That doesn't mean that the husband or the wife has now stopped being an emotional human being. Because we are human based on our emotions, our nature. We are emotional beings, we are spiritual beings, we are beings with soul. We're not matter. And so I think the whole idea of reconciliation within the framework of the maqasid al-sharia and the higher purposes of understanding and bringing reconciliation between texts and allowing the urf and the adl to play its role. That is what context means, is to look at the norms of society. And so as a South African citizen and citizens of this country, we view things phenomenally different to how somebody would view things that have only known what it means to live under a dictatorship. They don't know anything different. When we lived for a period in Saudi Arabia, we engaged with ulama there in terms of what the experiences were that were being that were unfolding in a South African context in 1994. And it was clear a person cannot, the Arabic saying says, فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِي. That which you don't know, how can you impart? You can't impart that which you don't know. And so, which brings me to the aspect of Sister Noran's presentation about the adat and urf of how we view these things is basically what it's all about. It is about how societies, norms and systems have constructed our thoughts and our opinions and our ideas. And so, I must be honest, and just to jump to the second part, Sister Noran, I felt that myself a bit wanting in terms of my previous readings on this issue. But we have Google here on the phone. And so, as horrendous and as appalling this practices of FGM and how we viewed these videos, again, the sheikh that had spoken there, he doesn't know anything else. If you wanted to look at the whole notion of extending a logic that there is some kind of a difference of opinion in this thing, and then really it's really that it exists, it's undeniable. But it's akin to saying that, Islam is okay with slavery. And yeah, there are people that say that. We have to talk about excesses, not this. So the whole idea of the Prophet ﷺ's words in a specific context that may have had a bearing on what the pre-Islamic and period of ignorance kind of cultural practices were and how he would address them does not necessarily mean that that became normative law. And so I think the issues about the HIV/AIDS and all of these things, as you know, Ron, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you and all of us that have this responsibility to be able to make contribution to society. You've also said that the gender inequality sort of attitudes and opinions and mindsets are kind of where these things also hinge on and the fulcrum of them and so forth. And we can't, but I can't. I'm just so struck by when we talk about this is I don't know this is probably a religion in general, and that is that when people speak about the evils, the social evils, we make a career out of it. We highlight these so bad things, and it is really un-Islamic. It's really antithetical to the Quranic approach of how you deal with things. And so in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the whole idea of eliminating social evils and things like that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَنَقْذِفُ بِالْحَقِّ عَلَى الْبَاطِلِ فَيَدْمَغُهُ فَإِذَا هُوَ زَاهِقٌ. So Allah says that when you deal with something which is negative and social ill, batil, something which is batil, strike it with the truth. Highlight the haqq. Strike that batil with the haqq. Don't strike the batil with more batil. Allow me to say this, and I know this is being recorded, and so it's totally off the mark. But on social media, the past while, we are going to be having a Shia masjid, community that's going to open. And in the last while, we have had Zayfa May Kira. In the last while, we have seen on social media how ulama repost and repost and repost the most vile kind of language that purportedly were used by Shia persons about Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, and the most vile expletives and swearing. But we as ulama deem it appropriate. Instead of the 50 people perhaps on that chat that saw it, we now need to make sure that 50,000 people see it. So this is the antithesis of how we should approach these issues in ensuring that we establish the truth and that we establish the haqq, and that, as Allah says in the Quran, وَجَاءَ الْحَقِّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ. Proclaim that the haqq is ever prevailing, and that the batil is ever destined to perish. And so I am you must forgive me, I'm still a bit emotional as I'm standing here. So I just want to say shukran very, very much to all our panelists for enlightening us and to really leave this indelible mark in our hearts, in our minds here today. We pray for Allah for your continued success in the amazing work that it is that you do in your spaces, and Allah Ta'ala grant you that satisfaction of knowing that we appreciate what you do, and that we really pray that Allah Ta'ala grant you strength and fulfillment in what you do, inshallah Ta'ala. And so by doing so, we pray that Allah Ta'ala accept from you and from all of us, and that with the barakah and the sacredness of Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Malik Yawm al-Din, Iyaka na'budu wa Iyaka nasta'in, Ihdina as-Sirata al-Mustaqim, Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وصحبه وسلم بفضلك دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحياتهم فيها سلام وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. شكرا.